awareness angel, making sure my wings protect the different, the stranger than. I'm an autism awareness angel. It's good, cause I'm cool with the unique behavior. I'm an autism awareness angel. Will you accept me? Cause I accept you. I'm an autism awareness angel, cause a view from the spectrum is a better point of view. The question at hand.
Hi, I'm Tally, and welcome back to Autism 30. I want to wish you all a very happy new year, and I want to thank you for joining us on the finale of our 3-part podcast with Jodi and Doug from their company, Overture Neurodevelopmental Support Services. Now, I want to thank you for joining us in studio on the first day of 2017. Did you have a wonderful time last night, and what did you get up to?
We had a nice, quiet, non-cognitive Netflix evening.
Oh, that sounds nice and peaceful and relaxing. And Doug, did you enjoy yourself as well then?
Absolutely. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you both. Now, I want to get back onto the services that your companies offered. And you offer something called Handle. What is Handle?
Well, Handle definitely passed the not too much blah, blah, blah test that we talked about in the first podcast.
Yes.
Especially when you're doing Handle. It's primarily a movement activity with children. So there's not a lot of need for conversation. We certainly set the table to encourage conversation, but we can still have a successful communication just with the movements that we're doing with our body. That's when we're doing Handle. When we're explaining Handle to other people, we still run the risk of blah, blah, blahing. So maybe we'll just define the acronym of Handle, talk a little bit about how and why it was created. And
yes.
then we'll start with a Handle activity. And that will give people something to do with their bodies while they're listening to this. And then we can talk about the theory once they have a bit of a point of reference to work with it, and hopefully we'll get a taste of Handle that way.
That sounds great.
Okay, so the acronym itself stands for a holistic approach to neurodevelopmental and learning efficiency. I won't go through all of the letters, but
okay.
Let's just start with the H for holistic. So in addition to just kind of helping kids with reading, writing, arithmetic, socializing with each other, it does take a holistic approach. So Handle would be concerned with things like toxins in your environment, not just presently, but even from when you were born, even when most vulnerable when you were in gestation. So if I could give a quick Handle,
of course,
PSA, personal service announcement, or public service announcement. We often recommend or just try to get it out in the future for people to consider if you're having a child and you know you're having a child. We're very protective of them once they're born. We realize they're really delicate. But in terms of your brain wiring itself, you're actually at your most vulnerable point in the first trimester. So that's when all the things that we're going to be talking about later with the vestibular system, all these things that are wiring up in preparation for supporting your vision and your hearing and your movement. Very, very delicate stage of development.
Yes.
And a lot of times people don't even know they're pregnant at that point. So
that's very true.
It can be difficult, but we certainly encourage people, if they know that they are, now is not the time to be building a nursery and painting and using mastics for tile and having mom have to breathe in drywall dust and all of that. All of that stuff can be put on hold as long as possible. And it's just getting that toxicity out of the environment at that very, very early stage. Other holistic things, diet is really important in Handle. The line Judith Bluestone, the founder of Handle, always used was neurodevelopment supported by nutrition could rewire the brain. But the nutrition part of it, you really need to make sure you're not eating anything that's causing any inflammation in your body, in your stomach, in your brain, anything that's causing any kind of stress, allergies, really don't do any service to neuroplasticity, or neural connections. And then maybe movement is something also holistically we would look at from the point of view of, again, a young child. Children are really designed to move. The brain is movement, and the wiring of the brain kind of happen in concert with one another.
Yes.
So things as our modern society gets together, car seats have been something that have been more common as we need to get kids around safely. So we put them in these seats, but they don't have a lot of room to move and express themselves in the way that their body needs to do it. So up until recently, they would be okay for a short ride, but then they'd start to fuss and cry, and they need to move. So
that's true.
But now with the advent of iPads and iPhones, we can kind of stimulate them a little bit in those car seats, and they will be distracted enough that they'll stay still. So it's almost like they're reading, which is something developmentally they're not. They're not designed to be reading at that point yet, or not that we're designed to read at all. We didn't evolve to read, but typically before a kid would sit still and read, it would be, they'd be 7 or 8 probably. But now they're sitting still at very, very young ages, sometimes 1 or even younger than that. So just that combination of that electronic stimulus that kind of hijacks their attention and the stillness, something to be aware of. So those are some of the holistic kind of things we would be talking about and handle. And the rest of the letters, we'll kind of let them come up as the conversation goes on. I just want to speak a little bit about how it was created.
Absolutely. How was it created?
The handle was brought together by a neuroscientist by the name of Judith Bluestone, who unfortunately passed away a few years ago in 2009. But she had suffered from a lot of central nervous system disorganization as a young child. So I would encourage people to read her very fascinating story to get a lot of insight into Handle as well if they're interested. And they can go to the Handle website at handle.org, and then there's tons of information on that. And the Handle letters as well.
Yes.
But maybe just start. Let's start to move. So Judith often said that the most important thing, especially in the beginning, once kids start to get their feet under them, we do things that require crossing the midline and could be left to right, top to bottom, front to back. We do things that hold their memory. They have to listen to multiple instructions before they begin the movement, so that kind of works on your impulse control and some of the more advanced things that they would see later. But in the beginning, she would always say, we need to get these kids tipping and tapping and sucking and blowing. So tip, tap, suck, and blow are her broad categories. There's about 120 some odd handle activities, but those are the 4 base ones that she's really interested in. And then there's another section that we use a lot in the beginning for stress relief, kind of massage-based activities. But I'm going to discount those from your options. I'm going to ask you to pick one of these in a second. I'll discount that because there's, with most of the activities, there's a loop between the environment, the brain. So there's sensory input coming in from the environment. There's some processing happening in the brain, and then a motor output, a response from the brain, and that cycle kind of continues throughout our environment and throughout our life.
Yes.
With massage, not so much. There's an input, and there's processing, but there's no output required. So I'm going to take that one off the table and some of the more advanced ones. But of the tip, tap, suck, or blow categories, if you can pick one. And
how about the tip?
How about the tip? Okay. So tipping is a nod to the vestibular system. This is really one of the crux of the handle activities.
And for those of you that weren't listening to the prior podcast and want a clarification about what the vestibular system is, can you do that, please?
Thank you. Yes. The vestibular system is housed in the inner ear. So it consists of 3 semicircular canals that give us information about where we are in space, how how we're relating to gravity at any given moment. And particularly, they will help us move, will keep our head up, I guess. So the first thing it wants to do is give us some, this, especially when we're born, we have this large head and no neck muscles to speak of. So when we're flopping on our stomach, we'll be slowly having our hands on the ground and really starting to wiggle our neck a little bit and start to get control of the three directions. And each of those semicircular canals is in charge of a different direction. So one is in charge of your head going up and down as if you were saying yes. Another one's in charge of your head going side to side as if you're saying no. And another one is in charge of if you were kind of at a diagonal, if your ear was going towards your shoulder or your shoulder was going towards your hip on the same side. That would be the third vestibular canal. So we use all of them at all times. And the big thing that Judith wanted to support people with was the isolating them. So when you're using them all at one same time and there's a little bit of a challenge or a little delay in processing, it could result in a visual delay or an auditory delay. And that
Which is very common with kids with autism.
Yes, absolutely. And anyone with neurological challenges, but for sure, autism. Which might be actually a good place to talk about where Judith, she wasn't a huge fan of the term autism. She thought of it as kind of just a catch-all. I mean, she understood the reason for it. Generally, when you get autism diagnosis or a lot of them, ADHD, Tourette syndrome, you can go down the list. Typically, when you look at how you would get such a diagnosis, you would go to a psychiatrist and they would have a list of maybe 20 or so things they're looking for. And if you have 6 or more, or 9 or more, or 12 or more, then you get the diagnosis. So in some cases, someone might have 8 and no diagnosis, and someone else might have a completely different 8, So,
yes.
So anyway, she wasn't, she understood it, and she understood it gave people some closure. It gave people like a reason. It gave a shorthand to explain the behaviors to the other people. It's a common language that people would understand. But in terms of actually developing your way through these challenges, it didn't offer much in terms of support. So she preferred the environment, sensory processing in, information in, processing, and then motor output. Loop. That's what she.
Okay.
That's where she liked to. That's where she lives
Mm-hmm.
in the handle activities. Tipping again. We'll pick 3 directions. So would you like to roll?
I'll roll.
You want to go yes. No, so rolling, that would be kind of like side to side. So kind of the no direction if you're shaking your head. Had a young man about 22 in seeing me recently, and I was doing this with him. And he was telling me he didn't think he would do it. Actually, at first he thought, I didn't want to get on the floor and roll around. But he said once I this particular activity, you're wrapped in a blanket. So he thought the idea of being wrapped in a blanket seemed so. It's something he did a lot himself. He would
Yes.
cover himself in towels, or especially he said, ever since I was a kid, I remember whenever my mom was doing the laundry. I would like to pull the laundry out and bury myself in it because he liked the weight, and he liked the warmth of the
Yes.
towels as well. But yeah, lots of kids love to bury themselves in various
They
things.
absolutely do.
So he did. He said he would go along with it, and so the rolling. So the reason Judith wants to, there's nothing really particularly complex about the rolling. It's just that you want to isolate the other 2. So whichever of the vestibular directions you're working on, you don't want to be doing the other 2. So and then the third component of that one, this one we may have to do 2. I don't know if this is going to be one that's going to be easy for people to. They could try it at home, I guess. But the rolling component needs to be done slowly, and this has to do with the fluids in your inner ear. One of the core challenge that Judith had growing up, they thought she was deaf, but it was just the fluid in her ear was so thick that it had almost solidified. So It obviously affected her. In addition to her movement, it affected her ability to hear. So they thought she was deaf. She didn't speak till I think she was about 6 or something. Ended up in a school for the deaf, and then she was in a special needs classroom. And her solution to the pain of being in having a dysregulated, like we say, when you're, what you see and what you feel aren't in
Congealed.
you feel sick to your stomach, right?
Absolutely.
And that's where you're at a carnival ride. You kind of they do that to you on purpose, right? So you'll feel nauseous. And
Like reading in the car for me.
Right, exactly. And great to do if you're at a carnival ride and you know it's only going to last 30 seconds, but you don't want to live there.
True.
And how she found what would beat that feeling is what you actually shut the system down. So you've got in those fluids that are moving in your inner ears, in the tubes in your inner ears, actually move little crystals, otholates they call them, and they run over little hairs, and that's what kind of trains from a kind of a mechanical informational input. Then your nerves can take that and turn it into an electrical one, and then can travel at the speed the brain likes to travel at. So the thing that she found that was able to shut that system down was by jumping on a pogo stick. So she bounced in a lot of the same ways some kids really like to be on a swing, or a lot of kids like to roll down hills, and that's really common for 3, 4, 5-year-olds to want to roll downhill a lot.
Yes.
If it's still happening at 10, I was out with a young man earlier this week in the snow, and he rolled on a tennis court for the entire width of the tennis court and then back, and he was asking me to chase him like I was walking at walking speed. So when you're getting the brain is craving that level of spin, it's usually an indicator for us. So she had indicated that by bouncing, they would kind of turn off. It would shut the system down to the point. She uses the example of, it's better to have a visual on this. If you're familiar with those kind of glow sticks,
yes.
They've got a little bit of like plasma in them, and then they've kind of got some sparkles. And if you turn them slowly, those sparkles will slowly trickle down from one edge.
Like a lava lamp?
Yes, very much like a lava lamp. And if that's happening, and you could imagine them going over little bits of information on the hair, then the brain is getting a ton of information, and then has to process that information. So it's very difficult. It's a hard work for the brain to do that. By going fast, if you spun those things, then the crystals or the little sparkles would just go to the end, and there would be no processing. So that's a really nice visual. Yeah, and that's what she's trying to do. That's why by bouncing on the pogo stick was to shut the brain, to shut the vestibular system down. So you can also get this done by spinning, by being on a swing, by being on a merry-go-round, all of those things. So if we find if kids are really obsessed with those activities or really don't want any part of them, so it's either hypo or hyper. We want them kind of right in the middle. We want them to be able to spin without getting sick, but if they spin all day, they should get sick. So we see both. So with that tip, now we've got the young man wrapped in a blanket, so that gives him some what we would call proprioceptive input. So kind of the input if you're standing up, you only get it on your soles of your feet. If you're sitting down, you just kind of get it on it's that deep pressure that kids often crave.
Yes.
So when you're lying down, it not only does it give your vestibular system a rest from having to hold your head up, it also gives you lots of input from your stomach or your back or your side. So you get a large surface area of. So that's really calming for the kids as well. And then generally we just simply roll slowly. So about a quarter of a turn, and then we'll stop. But we'll take maybe 7 or 8 seconds to get to that quarter of a turn, and then we'll stop, and then we'll let the fluids settle.
Okay.
And then we'll come back again. And we might. And the slower you go, the more intense it is for you. And then the other thing we do with kids and families is make sure they're aware of the stress systems the body will set out. So you're doing the same activities that they like to do at top speed, but now we're doing them really slowly. You're going to see things like them holding their breath,
yes.
Or they're going to see dizziness. They look like they've lost visual focus. They're going to tell you they don't want to do it anymore. They're going to look like they're sick to their stomach. So
yes.
Those are signs that as soon as we see those, that's when we need to stop for the day, and then they can pick it up again tomorrow and try it.
So it's kind of like lifting weights. I know when I lift weights, to do a lot of them quite quickly is rather easy, but when you take one slow one and do them really, really slowly, it's quite exhausting and a lot of hard work. Is that what you're referencing?
Yeah, I'm trying to think. So I guess if you're going slower, there's probably less forward momentum and a little bit more side-to-side balance. Is probably more muscle intelligence required.
Yes, and isolation of movement.
Right. Yeah. No, and actually, I'm glad you brought up weightlifting, because it is always nice to the neurodevelopment ND part of Handle is talking about the development of the neurons or the nerve cells in the brain, as opposed to muscle cell development. So typically when you're trying to develop a muscle, if you're working intelligently, you'll exercise it a little bit more than it's used to, and you'll create a little micro tear in the muscle. And then when you go to sleep at night, your immune system will come along and note that it's damaged, and it will dissolve it and take it away, and it will replace it with either a more durable one, or maybe two in the place of one, or something, so that it'll be more ready to handle that stress in the future than it was on this day. It works a little bit differently, works completely differently when you're developing neurons. A better exercise, not a better exercise, a better way of saying it, it's not stressed neurons or stressed neurological systems. They don't get stronger when you push them.
Yes.
They just shut down. So if you think more of an electrical box in your breaker box, I should say, in your house, if you got the juicer on and the toaster oven on and the vacuum on, and you blow the fuse, you won't do any benefit by cranking the oven up to a higher temperature. That's not going to help.
Very true.
In fact, in real life with the real brain, it's worse in terms of when we're asking kids for a motor response. The longer we push it, the more that system will just shut down. We will see, and along with the red, I don't know if we mentioned red ears as another sign we get.
No, you didn't, but
that's when the system is starting to go from what we call rest and digest to fight or flight, or sympathetic to parasympathetic to sympathetic.
And you're talking about signs of stress that you can visually see in your child.
Right, yeah. So you can kind of monitor their program so that they get just enough out of the activity, but not so much that it's going to, you don't want one step forward, 3 steps back.
Yes.
So, so by pushing a cognitive or a motor response after, once they've started to improve, so with repetition, and then they kind of start to get worse each time.
Yes.
That's another sign that you're going into stress. So it's really a good time to stop. Because if you keep pushing it, not only is it hard on the system, you can also damage your relationship with the individual you're working with, because they're hurting, and
Yes.
they might not be able to articulate it, but they're feeling they're feeling stressed in a way that is very uncomfortable, and you're not doing any benefits anyways. So
somebody who wants to practice Handle really needs to be trained in the method and
right, and that's the thing. We do spend a huge amount of time with the parents, is getting and the kids themselves. If you're doing it, or an adult, if you're doing it for yourself, you have to. You get some signals from the inside of your body you're going into stress,
Yes.
and some signals from the outside that you're going into stress. So the parents can really help with the outside signals, and once the kids really make that match, that internal to external, yes, I'm going into stress, it's one of the greatest gifts you can give a child. If you can have, how many adults can consciously be aware that they're starting to lose a grip on the situation, and if it takes you 10 or
Yes.
15 minutes before, oh boy, I've been upset for a while, before it dawns on you. But if you could pick it up right away, and you would know that, this person probably is wrong, but now is not the time for me to be arguing with them, or to go get a glass of water, or give yourself a break. And it's really a powerful development.
I think it's a skill that many of us
Yes.
and many people that I've definitely met in my life could use. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So what does a typical session look like when you go into session?
It typically, if a person is, I shouldn't say typically, because we have we have all different kind of variations. Sometimes they come once a month for basically a review of the activities that they've been doing. Just especially in the beginning, we might go to the loft maybe once a week to start, just to make sure they really have them solid.
Yes.
Solid enough that they feel that playful with them, and they can be confident to incorporate their children's interests into it and make it interesting. And it also looks, maybe some of the activities were too hard and we have to figure out a way to make them a little easier.
Yes.
Maybe the activities, they're starting to master them and now they're starting to get a little bit boring, which is also a sign of stress if something gets too easy and you're doing it.
Yes.
So we have to, the kids always tell me they like to level up. Doug,
Level up.
I got to level up this one or level down if it's too hard. Sometimes we drop an activity altogether and bring in one that's a little more complex. And that process goes on usually for hopefully for at least 6 months. And then you should be able to see if you're practicing daily. The activities, they come with instructions as well as the demos we give you, and might take 15 or so minutes the first couple times to read through them and really get confident with them. But once you've got them, you're cooking without looking. It's 30 seconds to 90 seconds per activity. Maybe you're doing 10 of them and it takes you 20 minutes a day. And then you'll come and see us, say once a month, and we'll spend an hour and a half reviewing everything and checking on just how things are going on all levels, not just the activities they're designed to, we're using these neurodevelopmental movements to rewire the brain.
So basically with what you're saying, when you mentioned every day, people just don't go and see you once a month and leave. Parents really have to be involved and do the activities with their kids on a daily basis for it to be effective.
That's right. Yeah, neuroplasticity really is it's a use it or lose it kind of proposition. So when connections are being made, they're called blooming, and when they're being cut, they're called pruning. So if you only do it once in a while, there's a lot of pruning will take place between sessions. So that's why the strategy is to teach the parents or teach the individual to do it daily, so that you can really build the lots of blooming and less pruning.
Absolutely.
Unless you want to prune. Sometimes we do have activities that are designed to prune, that are designed to break patterns, so that if a child says something and it tends to have to start a cascade of 7 other things they have to say at the same time, there are activities that are designed to, again, using the body, some kind of a rhythm in the body. It could be drumming, stomping. The brain likes to do things in 2 on one side, 2 on the other, 3 on one side, whatever it is. It likes to be the same, and by making that some asymmetry to that, 2 on one side, 1 on the other, 5 on one side, 4 on the other, you can really just slow the brain down a little bit and make it evaluate other options, other possibilities besides the rhythm that it's used to being in, and that can be really effective for kids who are suffering from any kind of OCD symptoms or something like that. It can again. So sometimes pruning is the goal. So brain plasticity is both. We're starving them out as well as encouraging their growth sometimes.
Which sounds great.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Doug, for explaining Handle to our audience and for both of you being here today. I hope you've enjoyed and found informative the first 3-part podcast featuring Miss Jodi Gilmore and Mr. Doug Protz from Overture Neurodevelopmental Support Services, located in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada, about their personal reasons of how and why they started their company, Holistic Nutrition and R&R, otherwise known as Reference and Regulate, and Handle, and how they've been passionately helping our community for years. If you would like to contact them, you can find all of their contact details on our webpage at autism30.com. We also want to remind you to sign up for our monthly newsletter to be updated about news and information about our community. You can do so by going to our webpage at autism30.com and go to the bottom of that page and click the word subscribe. Now, we hope you've had a wonderful New Year's Eve celebration last night, and that if you've made any New Year's resolutions, that you're successful in your attempts. Our goal here at Autism 30 is to serve you better in 2017. And if you have any suggestions and or comments, please let us know so we're able to do that. We do this podcast for you, and we want to know how to better serve and help you. Once again, this is Tally telling our wonderful Autism 30 listeners, may you have a brilliant 2017 and continue to live in love.
Hey yo, I'm an autism awareness angel, making sure my wings protect the different.